Hello and welcome everyone to DRJ's webinar series. I am Bob Arnold, President here at Disaster Cover Journal. Today's sponsor is AlertMedia, and today we'll be discussing how to safeguard your business travelers. To help welcome and introduce our panelists today, I'd like to turn it over now to Katie Goen.
Thank you so much, Bob. Hello, everyone. I am the Director of Content and Communications at AlertMedia, and I'll be your moderator today. And I'm excited for the discussion because we have an amazing guest with us today, Delia Midamba. She's an expert in risk management and has built travel safety programs from scratch. So you are certainly in good hands today. And speaking of Delia, let's go ahead and meet her. She's the head of corporate physical security at Cloudflare, one of the world's leading cybersecurity firms. Her work in security spans more than a decade, including a stint at the U.S. Department of State as a foreign affairs officer. She's also worked as a security consultant for PwC and built the protective intelligence program at the software company Splunk. Her expertise in building out robust security programs from scratch have helped organizations protect people, places, and assets at all times, anywhere in the world. Hi, Delia. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I'd also like to welcome Peter Steinfeld, another one of our speakers today. He's been involved in the emergency communications industry for more than 20 years now. He's the Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions at AlertMedia. So he works closely with a wide range of organizations to support their employee safety, business continuity, and emergency preparedness initiatives. He's also the host of AlertMedia's weekly podcast series, the Employee Safety Podcast, and he interviews experts from major organizations and agencies like Salesforce, McDonald's, FEMA, the CDC. I could go on and on. And actually, fun fact, Delia was a guest on the show earlier this year. So if you enjoy today's discussion, which I'm sure you will, you'll definitely want to check out that episode. But back to you, Peter. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here and can't wait to hear what else Delia has to say. Our episode on the podcast was fantastic. She shared great advice. I encourage you to go listen to that. And I think she's going to have some great things to say today, too.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for taking the time today, both of you. And I do want to take a quick moment to go over the agenda, just so we all know what to expect. First, we're going to talk about the current state of business travel, what we're seeing right now and why this is a really important topic. Then we'll go into some top business travel trends for 2023 and beyond. Then we'll get into kind of the nitty-gritty on how to build a travel safety program. We'll give you some advice and best practices for both starting a program and improving an existing program. And then, of course, we'll get to some audience questions from you guys, and we'll provide you with some additional resources as well. So before we get into all that, I do want to go ahead and launch our first poll. And it will be helpful as a discussion point for us today to kind of understand how we can better serve you. So if you'll go ahead and answer the question on your screen, which is, how would you describe your company's current travel safety program? Would you say it's flying high, which is a fully developed and implemented program? Thank you, Peter. Would you say taking off, which is basic program with room for improvement? Maybe packing your bags, which is like making plans and just gathering information to get a program going? Or maybe grounded, which is no current program or plans. And I hope you do all appreciate these travel themed answers. Took me probably longer than it should to come up with them. So
fantastic.
So let's get our answers in and we'll share those results now. Okay, so it looks like the majority of our attendees today are taking off. So they feel they have a basic program with room for improvement. So let me go to you, Delia. Is that about what you expected to see here today, or is that surprising to you at all?
No, I think that makes sense. I think the type of audience that would join a conversation on how to improve your program is probably a lesser maturity than fully packed and ready to go and flying high.
Right, absolutely. Peter, anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add is I was surprised by the number of people that felt like they were flying high. That's great. And it seems that it probably goes in tandem with us getting back into the swing of travel now that COVID is largely in the rearview mirror. So we'll talk more about that too a little bit later.
Yes, great point. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Peter now, who's going to talk about the current state of business travel and specifically how employees are feeling about work trips these days. So, Peter, it is all yours.
Well, thank you, Katie. And yeah, I'm going to start by providing some context that will help set the table for what Delia will be covering later. Here, we'll start with organizations are definitely experiencing a noticeable increase in business travel, which is quickly returning to pre-pandemic levels. According to the Global Business Travel Association, spending in this area is forecasted to recover to the pre-pandemic level of about 1.4 trillion by roughly 2026. And I mean, that's just a staggering number. That's a lot of money. As you can see on this chart here, spending has been on a fairly steady increase since 2021 as all the normal business patterns have returned and public health concerns have waned. And it's forecasted that the total business travel expenditures will far exceed $1 trillion by the end of 2023. That is a big number. So what does it mean for organizations? Well, more business travel means more risk to both employees and the business itself. Business travelers can face any number of potential threats during their trips, including things that are obvious like severe weather and natural disasters to things like crime and geopolitical conflicts and even illness. The other thing to consider is company intellectual property theft. It's really a huge risk as well, since employees often travel with company computers and mobile phones and devices, things like that, giving thieves yet another window into your organization. Employers really have a duty of care to protect their traveling workers from all these threats. And for those unfamiliar with the term, in this context, duty of care refers to the growing moral and legal responsibility of keeping your employees safe while they're working, no matter where they're working for you. And the breadth and depth of an organization's responsibility in this area has really been growing ever since the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, really going back in New York in March of 1911, where a lot of people died due to safety negligence. And it's expanded from the obvious, like ensuring people have good safety exits, sprinkler systems in the organization's buildings, to things like remote worker and traveler safety and hybrid worker safety, as well as mental health. That's also a big thing. And I just heard this story the other day. I thought I'd share it with you. A very large company had a few of their white collar employees that experienced medical conditions while working from home. And from a legal and insurance perspective, both incidents were considered workplace injuries. So these are people fully remote, had an issue while they were working at home, and law and the insurance companies said, yep, that's a workplace incident. So I think things are a little bit, shifting when it comes to duty of care, just something to think about. Now, when we think about travel specifically, it's really important to consider the employee's perspective. If and when you're asking them to take business trips, which as we saw is increasing. So to help illustrate this point, I'll refer here to the most recent State of Employee Safety Report for 2023, which AlertMedia publishes annually. And it surveys more than 2,000 full-time American workers from numerous industries, lots of different demographics and job levels and company sizes. So it's pretty representative. This year, we specifically asked them if they had any concerns about traveling for work. And it turns out they actually had a multitude of them. The responses you see here on this screen reflect the primary concerns of those business travelers. And the top three are pretty obvious: travel delays and disruptions that they might experience, their own personal safety and illness, but they're also concerned about things like not being familiar with their destination and lack of clarity about company travel policies. So I think this feedback demonstrates that many organizations still have a bit of a way to go when it comes to putting their business travelers' minds at ease and communicating all the travel safety protocols and procedures in advance before they head out on their trip. Now, the 2023 State of Employee Safety Report revealed several other data points that support the need for organizations to have an effective travel safety program. For example, the statistic on the left side of your screen here shows that over half of business travelers do not feel extremely safe when traveling for work, which is a pretty surprising number considering that we want our people to feel safe no matter where they go on our behalf. And to back up what I mentioned earlier, about 41% of business travelers say they've never been informed of potential safety risks at their destinations. And more than half of employees say they would not know who to contact if they were in harm's way or needed help during a work trip. Now, we know that managing risks for traveling employees can be overwhelming and complex, even for the largest organizations out there, especially so when you have so many people on the road. And businesses really need a simple, scalable, proactive way to fulfill their duty of care, like we talked about earlier. But it's also crucial to develop employee trust with your business travelers so they really have that peace of mind and that they know that you have their backs before, during, and after the trip. So now that you have that background context and better understand the why behind all this, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Delia to share some thoughts on how you can build a really strong travel safety program. So Delia, take it away.
Thank you, Peter. So we will start with the top business travel trends. So we kind of discussed this a little bit with Peter, but we're seeing an increasingly distributed workforce. So with the pandemic, I think a lot of us proved that working from home was possible, working remotely is possible. And a lot of companies have not gone back to being fully in the office. Maybe it's a hybrid model, maybe you're completely embracing remote work. Some of you may be requiring people to come back in, but either way, across the globe, we're seeing increasingly distributed workforces. What does that mean? There's probably more people traveling to get to their customers because they're not necessarily centrally based where their office was, right? And where their customers are. So we are seeing an increase in business travel, not just because the pandemic has ended, but also because employees are distributed across the globe now. Balancing employee right to privacy with duty of care. When you have employees that are so distributed across the board, it's easy to track, badge swipes in an office and say there's this many people around, this many people here, but how are you tracking those people when they are working remote or when they are on business travel? A lot of the times that involves maybe a downloaded app that allows GPS permissions, but then you get into the privacy rules about that. Are you tracking them only when they're doing their work and then that GPS turns off and, not on their personal time, and having to deal with the employee right to privacy and balancing that out with your duty of care responsibility. Health risks and the impacts of certain locations. So obviously the pandemic brought health risks to the forefront. It is not the first pandemic that's happened in recent history, but it is the first one that was really global and shut down everything across the world. And so if you lived in a region where maybe you did experience a pandemic in your region, your colleagues outside of that region maybe didn't. And so they weren't really thinking twice about their health while they traveled. Now it is pretty much at the forefront of everybody's mind. If I go to this location, how am I going to get health care if I do find myself sick or ill or injured? A lot of travelers didn't think about that before. They're thinking about it now. Increased personal security in situations worldwide. I think when you look at what's happening in Ukraine, currently with the increased activity in Israel, as people are traveling, they're starting to think twice about what am I safe? And as we see in those poll results that Peter shared earlier, employees are concerned about their own safety as they travel to new locations, whether that's a location that they're completely unfamiliar with, and so they don't know anything about that situation and their safety, or maybe they've been there a few times and they are kind of comfortable, but they don't know how to get help if they do find themselves in a security situation. And then building employee trust. Again, as Peter showed in the poll, employees are not confident, I'd say across the board, in their employer's ability to support them if they are in trouble. So even if you do have these programs, do your employees know about them? Do they know who to call? Do they know how to get in touch with you if they need assistance? So the benefits of having a program. Obviously, we're reducing corporate risk. There is a legal duty of care. Peter touched on it. It is not just around business travel. It's also about the work location. So that's where that distributed workforce again comes into play. And then scaling this program globally. Some of you may be in global organizations, some of you may not, but as your company grows, you're going to have more and more employees in different locations. They're going to be traveling to different locations. So are you able to meet that demand, assuming your team is probably not growing as fast as the rest of the company and other parts of the company? I think security teams tend to grow a little bit slower than the company as a whole. So are you going to be able to scale with the company as the number of people traveling increases? Streamlining your responses to travel emergencies. Again, there's very few of you and a lot of other people that are traveling. So do you have the tools that you need to be able to communicate with not just the travelers, but maybe with the third party that's assisting in getting them help, and then also with the people back in their work locations who need to be kept up to date on the situation, whether that's executives, whether that's the person's manager. Do you have all of those communication abilities set in place? Achieving 24/7 situational awareness. Again, someone could be traveling in a time zone that is completely not your own. If they need assistance, do you have people that can respond immediately if you are asleep and don't hear your phone go off. Staying ahead of the potential threats, knowing what the threats are, having situational awareness and being able to be proactive about giving safety guidance and knowing who could possibly be in harm's way for things that are things that we can anticipate. And then empowering your travelers to be safe. Again, making sure that they know that your team exists, that you are tracking this for them, how to reach you if they have questions, and preempting some of the basic safety tools that they can use when they're traveling for business. Real quick, I will touch on ISO 31030. Last year, ISO did release, I guess 2 years ago now, ISO did release this. It is travel guidance for organizations. It includes basic principles, framework, and processes to assist organizations in developing your own travel risk management system and program. It can be used standalone or it can be integrated with other programs. It's also a good way to kind of check in on your maturity of your travel program based on their recommendations and where they think organizations should be. All right, so what are the components of an effective travel safety program? So a quick overview, and then we'll dive into these deeper in the next few slides. Number one, risk matrix, understanding what the risks are. And they're gonna vary depending on your industry and what your travelers travel for. Ours are mostly sales folks for the most part. So they're, traveling with a laptop and that's about it. But they're going all over the globe. You might be in an industry where you've got a lot more high value equipment, or your workers are going to do a lot more dangerous work perhaps. And so what are the actual risks that your employees could face as a travel emergency? Understand what those are, prioritize them, and then tackle them in order of priority. Travel requests. Does your team have insight into travel requests? Does your team have the ability to, let's say, intercept travel requests if their request is for a certain high-risk location? Do you have insight into where your employees are going? Pre-travel risk assessments, again, do you have that insight into where they're going? Are you able to provide preemptive resources to employees who are going to maybe medium or high-risk locations? And that includes the travel briefs as well. Systems and technology. What are your employees bringing with them? Is there potential for compromise of those things, those devices? And as well, do you have the systems in place, again, to know where your travelers are and to receive the risk information associated with where your travelers are? And then lastly, there's also executive protection. I think executives have a different risk profile. They're probably well more way known than your basic employees. So there's a little bit more to consider when you're looking at executive travel. So we'll start with the risk matrix, and my role spans across very many different types of categories, but this conversation is about travel safety and travel risk. So we'll look at those top few lines of this matrix here. So what we're talking about is, what are the actual risks that could happen to an employee while they're traveling? We're talking theft, injury, illness, kidnapping, death. The list may be very different depending on your industry. And then what is the likelihood that these things occur based on your business profile, your risk profile for your business? Maybe this changes throughout the year. Maybe there's some sort of protest against your company, and so the travel risk goes up because if they're wearing a company logoed anything, they might be a target. That it's not a static situation of risk, but knowing what the risks are that you're actually trying to tackle, understanding the likelihood, and then from there, what is the actual impact to people, places, assets? That includes business continuity, because if an entire team is impacted or majority of a team is impacted, obviously business continuity will be impacted as well. And then once you know the threat, the likelihood, and the impact, what is the exposure? How much could this cost the company if this all goes wrong, right? And then what are your actual mitigations? From there, you can prioritize which risks you want to tackle, whether that's based on the likelihood. Well, these are the more likely things to happen, so we need to drive that down, right? Or these are the most impactful things to people, places, or assets, so we need to drive that down. Or exposure. this is going to cost us the most if this, happens. So we need to drive that down. And when we look at exposure, we're not just talking about the $1,000 laptop that was stolen. We're talking about, were they able to actually get their meetings done that they flew all the way there for? We're talking about, could this impact our stock price if this got out in the news that this situation happened? We're talking about, could we be sued by the person's family if we don't handle this situation properly? So the exposure is really looking at all of those costs, in addition to the individuals who have to help and their salary and the time that they're going to spend dealing with this risk and dealing with this incident. So exposure captures all of those things. And so depending on how your business chooses, you can prioritize your risks once you know what they are by any of those 3 types of categories, and then from there move into how you want to mitigate. And then, if you're looking at like a 3 or 5 year plan, you can say, this year we're going to tackle these 2 risks and make sure that we're solid on those, and then next year we'll tackle these additional ones, and then keep going as you mature your program. So travel requests, again, like I said, do you have the ability to know who's traveling and communicate to those people? So developing and communicating your policies and procedures and putting them in a place where employees can easily find them, maybe including this information in new hire onboarding training, maybe if there's targeted teams that travel a lot, maybe hold special sessions for them so they're aware of the process, and even if they forget the process, they at least know that they should reach out to you with their questions, so there's no delay in getting them assistance when they do reach trouble. And then how and when should they submit those travel requests? Depending on how small your team is and the volume of travel, you may not want to see every single request, because that's just bogging down your inbox, bogging down, your other workload and what you have to do. So maybe you want to prioritize, certain locations as high risk, and say, we want to see all of the high risk travel and only the high risk travel, and then that gets routed to your team for actual action. Maybe it's medium and high. It just depends on the capacity that you have. And then making sure that you can actually get that data, whether it's through your travel team, whether it's an integration with a software like AlertMedia, whatever that looks like for you, being able to actually have the insight you need from travel requests. And then how this currently works at Cloudflare is we have an allow list for personal travel. So if you want to go somewhere personally, vacation, PTO, maybe you've got a sick family member and you want to change your work location for a little bit to go deal with that. We have an allow list of like, here are some places that we say, it's fine. There's no reason for our team to get involved. Clear it with HR that and the tax team that you don't have a tax liability if you go work in that location for however long. But from a safety perspective, you're good to go. Have fun. I don't need to see it. And then there's also high and medium risk travel, and that counts for both personal and business travel, right? And so even if you're doing a business trip, even if the company is saying we need you to go here, our team needs to see it, and we need to make sure that we're giving you certain advice. And so for us, our team has direct visibility into the travel booking system, the travel requests. We're able for high risk countries to actually block that in the booking system, so they can't even book without talking to our team first and getting the information that they need before they go. For medium risk countries, there's some enhanced things we might do maybe to your laptop to protect you, or maybe there's some travel briefings that we want to make sure you see before you go. And so making sure that we have that information ahead of you traveling and not just after the fact when something's gone wrong. So what does that pre-travel risk assessment look like? We are looking at the physical safety of the person. Is this a location? And we're not just looking at in general. We do at Cloudflare narrow it down, because there could be a different risk for women travelers, and there could be a different risk for LGBTQ+ travelers. So we do present all of that information. We don't ask people to identify any of that information to us. We just provide them with the information saying, like, here's a general risk, here's also the risk if you are female, here's also the risk if you identify as LGBTQ+. And making sure that they have that for their physical safety. We're also looking at personal and company IP there, and those vary. Sometimes the risk of you, having your credit card skimmed is much higher versus like somebody trying to get our company IP from you. And sometimes it's flopped. Sometimes it's a very low personal cyber risk, but we know for a fact that that country targets our company. And so now your company IP risk is quite high. We're also looking at the tax implications. You know, if you constantly travel to a certain location that's not your home location, you may have to start paying taxes to that location. So how often are you going to this place? Are you staying a certain number of days that ends up having a tax liability for the company and for you personally, and making sure that you're aware of that and can balance that as well. So we are looking at all three of those things. We provide our employees with all three of those things when they do their travel requests, again, both for personal and business travel. And we make sure that they can have that information on their own. But we also, like I said, through tracking travel requests, we make sure that even if they don't know that they need to be paying attention to those things, that our team is inserted in the process so that we catch that stuff on the front end. And so travel briefs, as we saw from the polls, the employees are not as aware of their own safety and what they can do to protect themselves when they travel. So we use travel briefs to help employees understand their risk. And it can vary from company to company and industry to industry. Like I said, maybe there's a certain time where risk is higher because people are mad at your business for whatever reason. Maybe there's a certain time where things are higher because just what's happening in the world and the situation is changing and they need to be aware that it could change. I mean, the stuff happening in Paris recently, situations change pretty quickly. So helping employees understand what the risks are at the moment that they expect to travel. Obviously, we can't catch everything, but keeping them informed, and then make sure that they know who to contact if they need assistance. So, you know, here's the basics on how to protect yourself, but here's what to do if you need, you know, more than what I've just given you. And so, you know, people in the US maybe are pretty familiar with the US and pretty familiar with certain states, but maybe they're going to a state that they've never been to, or maybe they're from a small town and we're sending them to New York City and they're like, I don't know, this is very overwhelming for me. What am I supposed to do here? You want me to get on a subway? What is that, right? And so walking them through that process and helping them understand that you know, we're here to support you. Here's the basics. Here's how you're going to stay safe. And then, you know, for international travel, maybe they've never left the country that they live in. Maybe they need assistance. Like, what do I do? How do I get a taxi? What am I going to, you know, is Uber going to work there? Like, what do you suggest? And making sure that they understand those dynamics. Systems and technology, again, do you have the information you need, number one, to know where your travelers are, to be able to identify the risks that are happening to them as they're traveling, and then to notify them when you do identify the fact that they're in harm's way. Is it a two-way like communication? Can they respond back to you, or is it just you pushing information to them? Once you've identified that they are in harm's way, like, how can you actually receive the information back and not just like, yep, I'm good, or nope, I'm not good. Well, great, now we've identified that you're not good, but what are we going to do about it? How am I going to keep that conversation going? The picture that you see here is the AlertMedia platform, and one of the reasons that I like it is because it does offer two-way communication. So it's not just my employees needs assistance, it's my employee needs assistance, and I can keep that conversation going right there from whatever medium they used to receive it. So whether that was their cell phone and they want to keep the conversation going from their phone, or whether they chose email, you know, can you keep that conversation going without needing to switch to a separate platform to assist them? Executive protection, like I said, they have a higher likelihood for facial recognition. People notice them, they know who they are. You know, walking down the street, people are going to recognize Mark Zuckerberg. They're not going to recognize your average Facebook employee. So they have a slightly increased risk. You know, when people are mad at the company, they tend to be mad at the face of the company, not just the company in general. So threats that come in, maybe they don't impact your employees, but they do impact your executives. So understanding that you have increased protections that you should put in place for them. Consider maybe guards or armored cars, maybe translators. One thing that I do advise is perhaps having them executives be on different flights if they're all going, let's say maybe to a company kickoff or event, so that, if anything happens, if there's delays, if there's some sort of issue on that flight, a safety issue even on that flight, you don't have your entire executive team stuck and impacted by the same thing. You might also want to consider the fact that information-wise, your execs are kind of holding the key to the castle. They kind of get all of the information on the company. So are their devices locked down? That includes their personal phones, to a way that can actually protect your company IP as they're going about their business travel.
Wow, Delia, that was such a fantastic framework for how to build a program. And now can you kind of talk us through some advice or best practices that you have on either how to get started with a program or maybe how to improve an existing one?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, begin with identifying your risks. They're going to vary from company to company. I had that slide with mine, but I know what your risks are. Prioritize them either by the impact or the likelihood or the exposure, and then determine what you need to do to buy down those risks. Like I said, you can't tackle every risk at once. So crawl, walk, run. If you try and do everything at once, you'll probably do a little bit, and then if something happens, you may not be properly poised for any of the risks. So kind of start small, figure out which ones you have the capability to buy down first, and then go from there. Okay. Improving and maturing your program, like I said, stay vigilant. Do you know how to receive information about where your travelers are and what could impact them? Test your systems, your protocols, your procedures, not just when incidents happen, but do tabletop exercises. Make sure that the teams that you have to work with in the business know who you are, know how to contact you, especially in companies where employees are like, I don't know who to contact. They're probably going to go to their manager first. Does their manager know how to contact you? Does the travel team know how to contact you? Make sure that you test all those systems, and conduct trainings. Like I said, include this in your employee onboarding training. Maybe you guys have yearly mandatory training. Maybe add that, especially for teams that you have identified as teams that travel regularly. For small teams, when I normally start these programs, there's very few of us to do the work. So collaborate internally, make friends with other teams that can assist you, whether that's your HR team who is used to having to check in on employee wellness, your travel team, maybe even the sales teams or the teams that travel the most in your company. Make sure they know who you are, collaborate with them as much as you can. They'll be willing to give you the information that you need to protect the employees, even if you don't have systems and technology in place to do that for you. Utilize external resources whenever you can. Like I said, ISO, attending talks like this one. And then invest in technology. I think technology is a great force multiplier when you have a very small team. So things like AlertMedia, they're not the only one out there, but there are other programs, other software, but invest in technology that can assist you and be a force multiplier when you have a very small team.
Okay,
Excellent.
Peter, you have some key takeaways for us. I know that was a lot of information from Delia, so let's hear from you to summarize this a little bit.
Absolutely. No, I think it was great advice. As she was speaking, I wrote down a list. I was typing here on my screen about 5 or 6 questions. I don't think we're going to have time for today, but there's just so many things that come up with this topic. But to wrap things up here, here are some key takeaways based on the presentation, and I hope you'll find it helpful. First, always be sure to develop and clearly communicate your travel procedures. That's something a lot of people often overlook, and they don't think about the different types of travelers they have. Some people have never been on a trip before. Others have been on 3,000 trips and everything in between. So you got to think how you're going to communicate to people based on those different levels of experience, and ensure that every business traveler is aware of what to do before, during, and after a trip. Next, perform some level of risk assessment for each travel request, as Delia was saying. This really helps determine which trips you approve, as well as any mitigation strategies for those trips that are more risky in nature. Just because a particular country or city is marked as, super risky or do not go doesn't mean you can't. Sometimes you do business in those places and you have to go there. You just need to take the right steps to make sure people will be as safe as possible given the nature of the risk. And then third, prepare employees for what to expect at their destination. This is often overlooked by a lot of organizations. This includes things like not just safety, but cultural information, but also unsafe areas to avoid, tips for how to communicate very quickly if you need help locally, and a whole lot more. Most travelers really get a sense of those things after being somewhere for a day or two. So give them a jump start and provide that feeling before they arrive. It's really valuable. And then next, this is really a big one. Ensure travelers know who to contact and how during their trip if they need assistance. Having this information is one of the most requested items, and it's such low-hanging fruit in terms of something you can provide quite easily. So really think about how you communicate that out and make sure people really understand who to call, when to call, what app to use, however they need to reach out for help. And then lastly, take advantage of the latest technology to monitor and communicate with your business travelers so you can be very proactive about their safety. Things have really changed over the last 5 years or so as far as the tech available. There's some amazing stuff out there. Clearly, we're biased toward AlertMedia, but there's other products too. So keep your eye on the latest out there and take advantage of it. So again, AlertMedia does provide very easy to use technology to help with all these objectives. And our unified platform really enables you to quickly understand what threats are around your people and assets with analyst verified threat intelligence. So we're not overwhelming you with every single signal out there, a lot of which is mis and disinformation. We're making sure an analyst gets their eyes on it. So when you see it from us, you know it's real. We can also help you rapidly communicate with your people over multiple channels to inform them of threats to health and human safety or business continuity, as well as solicit feedback, which is something Delia was saying, that back and forth communication is so important to understand their welfare or their potential need for assistance. And not only can you do this for your people where they normally work, so the office they normally go to or the facility they normally go to, or where they live, so those are more static type locations, but you can also do it with great precision based on where they travel. Just imagine getting an automated alert in the middle of the night that a tornado warning was just issued in an area where you have, let's say, one facility with 100 people, 8 travelers happen to be visiting there, and 22 people with homes nearby. Within seconds, your team will know exactly what's happening, where it's happening, and who is impacted. And frankly, the faster that you know about an emergency, the faster you can respond. And generally speaking, the faster you can respond, the better the outcome. All right, Katie, I'll turn it back to you for, I think, we've got a final poll here.
Yeah. I do want to get to some audience questions because we've got a lot of great ones coming in, but I did want to launch this final poll right now. So as Peter said, we have a lot of folks at AlertMedia that can help you with this. So just take a quick moment right now, if you could, to let us know if you're interested in learning more. You can say yes, and we will be in contact with you to get the info that you need. Or you can say no, not at this time. And of course, no hard feelings. We will always be here for you if you need us later on. So go ahead and get your answers into that one if you could please now. And then Bob, we can go ahead and close out this poll and get to some audience questions now, because like I said, I want to make sure we have tons of time for that. So this question, I think both of you could probably weigh in on, but Delia, I'll have you start. Do you have any thoughts about work from home medical issues? Actually, I think Peter referred to that a little bit earlier, or physical assaults that happen during conference calls and webinars?
Yes, I think in most countries, that will count towards your company's obligation for duty of care. So if they are working from home and that is their designated work location, not just like they called in sick one day so they're at home, but if that's their designated work location, or your company doesn't have a policy that designates a work location for employees, that will fall under duty of care. So your company does have some legal obligation there to assist an employee that either injures themselves at home while working during business hours, or has some sort of an assault situation, maybe even a stalker. Our team does handle those types of situations. We do offer some, like, a review of an employee's home if they need us to help shore up the security there. But that's why the distributed workforce is a challenge for a lot of security teams right now. Before, we were maybe in charge of like 20, 30 offices around the globe, and now we're in charge of thousands of homes as well, because a lot of the offices didn't close, right? Or they temporarily closed, but we didn't shut them permanently. And so the expansion of duty of care has definitely happened with the increased work from home.
Anything to add to that, Peter?
I would say to the specific idea of if, let's say, you're on a Zoom or a Teams or some kind of web meeting and something happens to the person on the other side, they are suffering a medical issue, or like you said, they get attacked, whatever it is, that's a tough one. You know, when we're all together in an office, everyone knows they can start rendering help immediately. They can go get a defibrillator, or they can get, you know, whatever it is they need. But when someone's remote, you're like frozen. Like, what do I do? So I think it's important for safety teams and business continuity and resiliency teams to add that to their training. Like, just talk about it. It's the elephant in the room. Hey, you're going to be using web-based meetings a lot. Please, if anything ever happens, this is what you're supposed to do. There is no one right answer, but give people something. It's probably going to be some combination of calling 911. But what are you going to do then? Like, do you know where that person lives? So maybe part of your protocol is when you get on meetings, hey, everyone, let me know, like, where are you? Are you at your home? Something like that. And then each one of those people should know if something happens, who they can reach out to on the safety team to say, I am on a call with someone right now who needs help. I don't know what to do. Here's their name. And then that person on the safety team can run with it and help get them assistance.
Such a good point. Thank you so much. Here's just kind of a clarification question I'll pose to you, Delia. Do you inform people in a location if something occurs while traveling, or is this just a preparation and preparedness technique?
Yeah, so we follow them through, you know, from the time of booking until they return to their normal place of work. So as Peter showed with AlertMedia, you get those instant push notifications that your employees are impacted by a certain event, and that includes travelers. So if something is happening across the globe, we do have kind of a push notification that lets us know our employees are impacted. And then from there, we check in with them, make sure they're okay, or they know how to respond to the incident.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Delia, sticking with you for a second, how do you work with employees that might be seeking entertainment off hours while they're traveling? That could be dangerous, like nightclubs, bars, things of that nature.
Yeah, so when we give our travel briefings, we do have, you know, sections that may include certain parts of the city to avoid. And, you know, that could be anything from, you know, red light districts to, you know, favelas in Brazil. But at the end of the day, if they are in business travel, regardless of whether it's business hours or non-business hours, you are still responsible for them from a duty of care perspective. So we do kind of advise our employees on, you know, appropriate behavior when they're on business travel. Obviously, we can't watch everybody all the time. Again, that gets into that GPS stuff and the data privacy of, you know, how much you're actually paying attention to what they're doing. But if they were to get themselves into trouble, even if it was past normal business hours, for the duration that they are on a business trip, you're responsible for everything that they do. So if they're going to a place where we're like, hey, this is illegal, you know, maybe paying for a call girl or something like that is illegal, we give employees that information, like, here, you know, this isn't necessarily directly a safety issue, but this is some information to know, you know, on your trip, because at the end of the day, we are still responsible.
Thank you for that. That makes sense. Sticking with you again, Delia, Peter, I'll get back to you in just 1 second. I think this is kind of a leadership buy-in question. Do you have any advice for a large global organization that does not necessarily see the need or value in this, despite being a business continuity team of one who does? How do you convince them to align with travel risk management program or software?
Hopefully, if they are a large organization, hopefully you have some data that you can throw at this based on incidents that have happened in the past while on business travel. I don't know which team tracks that. Sounds like you're a business continuity team of one, but somewhere, whether that's the security team or somewhere in your organization, the travel team, somebody should be tracking that incidents are happening when people travel. So if you take that, if you can get your hands on that data, and then to use that risk matrix, right? Here's the likelihood. We had, you know, this many injuries, this many thefts, this many whatever. And then say, what is the actual exposure to the company, right? A lot of times, if you can translate it into a dollar amount, like, hey, I can save you this much money if we tackle this, and tackling it is going to cost you like 1/16 of the exposure that we already have by this is happening all the time, and it's going to grow as the company continues to grow. And if we just invest in this one tool or this one product or this one whatever, I can drive this risk down for you. I think anytime you can put it into dollars, you'll probably get some buy-in from executives.
Peter, anything to add to that?
Just to maybe emphasize that's so on target. Like, you can scare people a little bit with the anecdotes and the stories about maybe the scary things that happened within your own company or other companies. Like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't want that to happen here, would you? But then be sure to back it up with the data. So really go around and collect as much information you have, because those scary stories get people's attention, but it's the data that makes them want to spend money on something.
And Peter, I'm going to stick with you for a second, but Delia, I'd like you to weigh in on this as well. What is a strategy to get employees to opt in to notification and monitoring apps? Some of that privacy stuff we were talking about earlier. So Peter, why don't you start?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. You can't demand it, because that will push people away even more. You really have to start with the why. Help people understand that we really do care about you. If you're unable to work, you can't be productive. If you can't be productive, company goes out of business. So this is all about making sure that you are really safe, because it's good for you, it's good for us, and it's only for your safety. We're not using it for anything else. That's the key. Make sure people realize you're not going to be sending them messages through a system like this, or tracking them to look at productivity, or asking them to do things outside of business hours. It's all about safety. If you really start with the why, and then again, use some of those scary anecdotal stories, back it up with some data, people usually say, okay, I get it, you're right. And then show that they have the option to opt out. Like, they could opt out of certain notification channels, or they could turn off their location tracking, that they have more power than they think. If you just tell someone, hey, log in and use this, then they're like, wow, it's like you attached a tracker to my back and I have no choice in this matter. Give them a choice, show them the power they have, and they're much more likely to sign up.
Delia, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say if your company is willing to offer, or does already offer, like a separate work phone or something, that turn it on your work phone and not on your personal, if you're uncomfortable with this. And then if you're out and about doing stuff after the business meetings are done, and you can leave your work phone in your hotel and you can go do you, and I'm not tracking you, I can't see it, I can't do anything with it, right? If your company is not a company that is willing to maybe issue travel devices, even if they don't issue regular devices, then I think Peter's comments are spot on.
Very good. Do you have any tips for how organizations should measure the effectiveness of their travel risk management program, Delia?
Metrics, I know it's a word that people hate, but at the end of the day, we're doing all of this to buy down those risks, right? So at the end of the day, if you can track this data, how many incidents do we have? Is it trending down? Is it trending up? Are we doing enough? Keeping track of the incidents, the types of incidents that you're having, and the frequency, I think is the best way to kind of measure the effectiveness. Also, getting feedback from the employees, right? Employees who've interacted with your team, maybe you send them a post survey or something after their trips, or maybe once a year or quarterly, however you do it, but getting actual feedback from employees on, like, yep, we know who your team is, yep, we feel like you're protecting us, here's what you could do better, getting that from them.
Okay, thank you. Here's a scenario that one of our audience members shared. So I'll just read this, and then if you guys want to comment on it. We have seen a rise in workers wanting to be able to work while traveling abroad for months at a time. Just curious about the liability after what you said. If we approve a user doing this, are we still responsible if it's a personal trip, but they are working normal hours and we're aware of that? I see you nodding.
Yeah, that's why these requests actually come to our team, like, first-ish. Some people go to the we have a team called Global Mobility who does all the checking on, like, your tax application and blah blah blah. Sometimes they go straight there, but usually they come to us first, because yes, if they are working, even if they made a personal decision to go to that location, if they are working, you have a duty of care. Once they're on PTO, you're free and done. But if they are working, no matter where they're working from, no matter whether you said they could go or not, if they are working, you have a duty of care.
Wow, that's a good point. Even if you haven't given them permission to go and do that, it is still something you need to watch out for. Interesting. Okay, Peter, does the AlertMedia software integrate with Concur?
Yeah, I mean, short answer is yes. Yeah, if you're using Concur to book and track all your travel, you can synchronize that over into our system very easily. So then on the map, you're able to very quickly see where your people are, all their travel details right within our console, and then get alerted to any kind of issues that are popping up around them based on the threat alerts that our team is pushing out. Not only can you get it to see that they're potentially in a danger zone, but you can set it up for the traveler to get that information directly as well.
I'll jump in
Excellent.
because we actually use Concur.
Okay, great.
They made it so easy. Concur built their own integration app. And so once you do your data privacy checks and vendor checks and all of that fun stuff, it's just a button that you have to click and it syncs everything for you. So it's actually a super easy integration. You don't have to do any integration work yourself.
Oh, excellent. Thank you both for that.
Ben.
Peter, I'm going to go back to you for a second. If there's a potential threat to one of our travelers, what messaging should we use to inform them that will not scare or panic them? Which I think is a great question.
Yes, it is. So first, I think it's always helpful if your people know that this is a service that you provide, so then they expect those messages when they arrive. There's no surprise then. So be sure to really go out and advertise it. And then second, people don't like to receive information in a vacuum. That's a really big thing. It's really important to provide some context around the situation. If you can, let them know at least that there will be follow-up messages. Imagine you just get an alert that, hey, there's a shooter in your area and nothing else comes through, right? You have to let them know we'll continue to follow up as more information is available. And then, as Delia said, enable them to ask questions or request assistance. It's got to be a two-way dialogue to be most effective. And all those things together really help kind of take someone from a level 10 down to maybe a 2 or a 3.
Great point. I have another scenario here I'd like to read if you guys would like to weigh in. One important tool we provide is to ensure in-country boots on the ground type of security assessments to travelers. Sometimes the auto-generated reports are taken off of websites that are not vetted by in-country folks with that knowledge. Delia, I see you nodding your head. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very nuanced. So it depends on where you get your information from, right? As far as the briefings are concerned. But I do agree that it can be nuanced. And so we do welcome, if we have boots on the ground in a location, we always welcome like their feedback, or we'll check in with them and say, hey, this is how we're rating this. Like, what are you guys seeing? Or do you agree or do you not? And maybe we'll stick with what we had, or maybe we'll change it, but we do leverage boots on the ground. That being said, it is nuanced, and so sometimes for travelers, the risk is very different than for somebody maybe who's from that place or who's very experienced in that place. And so for us, there are times where we will say, if you are native to this location, you are free to go. If you are not, you need a security escort to go. We don't kind of do a blanket approach to anything. We do kind of nuance it.
I see. Peter, any thoughts you want to add to that?
Oh, that's great. I think it's well put.
Well, I'm going to put you both on the spot here for a minute. One of our audience members would like to know if there's any other major new or emerging global travel risks that you guys have heard of that you could briefly touch on. Delia, anything come to mind?
Nothing off the top of my head. I mean, I think I think health risks, like I said, are new. The kind of the scale of which you're going to have to monitor, just because employees are not all centralized in like little clusters anymore post pandemic, is definitely. But I don't think there's anything we haven't already touched on. I don't know, Peter, if you have any other thoughts.
Do you have anything, Peter? Otherwise, we can move on to the next one.
No, I think we can move on. I haven't really seen anything, but to Delia's point before, like, we're so involved in this that we kind of speak the language fluently and it seems normal to us. So that may be like, oh yeah, that's normal. Like, it's not a big deal for us, but other people are like, what? So it's kind of hard to communicate that sometimes, but I don't see anything big like a COVID pandemic or anything like that that's going to make a dramatic change anytime soon.
Gotcha. Delia, can you elaborate what distinguishes a mature travel risk management program from maybe an immature program or one that's just getting started? Like, are there any benchmarks there?
Yeah, I'd say when it's immature, it's ad hoc, right?
Mm,
More mature, like it's preemptive. You know who's going, you know where they're going. You have methods to communicate to them while they're traveling and before they're traveling. You also have resources to assist them. So it's like, okay, great, I know you're going. Yeah, I can send you this briefing. That's fun. But what happens when, excuse my language, shit hits the fan, right? So do you have the appropriate contracts in place if they need to be extracted and assisted out of the country? Do you have, do you know how to get them medical assistance in country? Does your company have appropriate traveler insurance set up so that, because their home insurance probably will not translate to wherever they're going, so that they are not out of pocket for certain medical expenses? I mean, that especially when people are coming to the US from foreign countries, we don't have a healthcare system that is very beneficial for foreigners who get sick here. So do you have those things taken care of that actually can assist? Like, it's great, yay, I know you're going, yay, I can track it, yay, I can check in with you. Now I've checked in with you and you say you need help. Oh, how am I going to help you, right? Like that's where you know that you've actually matured the program, is like you can run through those scenarios of how I'm going to help you, and you've got an answer to every single one of them, and you've got contracts in place with people that can help you globally to assist.
excellent. That is a fantastic answer. And we're
Can I
going to
add
go ahead
something
and end.
real quick?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Peter, just real
I think
quick.
it goes back to the very beginning where Delia said it's important to take a crawl, walk, run approach, because if you start running on day one with an immature program and everything's ad hoc, you'll find yourself backed into a corner where you're like, ooh, I just said we can offer this and I have no way to back it up. So I think it's probably better to have I don't want to call it weak, there's probably a better word, but a formal program that's not super mature as opposed to a really comprehensive ad hoc program what's not really backed up by much. That can actually get you in a lot of trouble.
It's a great point as well. Well, thank you guys. That is all the time that we have for questions, but we do have some additional resources to share with all of you if you want to learn a little bit more. All of these assets are free at alertmedia.com in the resources section. That State of Employee Safety report Peter referred to earlier, just full of a ton of really useful data. We have some business travel templates that you can find useful as well. So again, those are all free. I recommend you check them out. And I really just want to thank Peter and Delia. Really appreciate your time today. If you guys would like to connect with Peter and Delia, you can find them both on LinkedIn at the usernames listed here on the slide. So Delia, thank you so much. We really enjoyed your thoughts and expertise today. Thank you for sharing them. And Peter, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here as well.
Absolutely. Hope everyone enjoyed it.
Excellent. Well, that concludes our presentation today. Thank you all for spending part of your day with us. We hope you'll join us again at another AlertMedia webinar. And of course, I want to thank DRJ for hosting us and being such a wonderful partner.